No, Mom. The red button is for off. You just turned it off again. My son, Mark, let out a long, slow sigh. He pointed a finger at the sleek black remote in my hand. It was a simple thing, with only 3 large buttons. He'd picked it out himself. The big one in the middle is for the volume, he said, speaking slowly as if to a child. A hot flush of shame crept up my neck. I could feel the heat on my cheeks. Then, just as quickly, a cold spike of anger went through me. I knew how to work a remote control. I had managed a household budget for 40 years. The problem wasn't the 3 buttons in my hand. The problem was the 6 figures in my retirement account, and he knew it. Mark sighed again, louder this time. The sound filled my small, quiet living room. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen lighting up his face in the dim afternoon light. He tapped the screen a few times, then held it to his ear. "Hey, Brenda," he said. He glanced over at me, then lowered his voice to a stage whisper I was clearly meant to hear. "We'll have to talk later. She's having a bad day." I kept my eyes on the dark television screen. My own reflection stared back at me, a woman with white hair and a tired expression, sitting on her own floral sofa. The only one having a bad day was Mark. His impatience felt like a storm cloud gathering right over my head. I heard the front door open before he even hung up the phone. Brenda came in carrying 2 large paper grocery bags that crinkled loudly. She set them on my kitchen counter with a thud. "Thought you could use a few things, Mom," she announced, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I hadn't asked her to shop for me. I had my own list on the refrigerator. She started putting things away, reorganizing my pantry as she went. The scent of her strong perfume filled the air, covering the familiar smell of cinnamon and tea. "Just making things easier for you," she said, her back to me. She moved my favorite Earl Grey tea from its usual spot to the very top shelf, where I'd need the step stool to reach it. She put 3 cans of low-sodium chicken noodle soup, a kind I despised, right at eye level. This wasn't help. It was a slow, quiet takeover of my own kitchen. As she left, she leaned down to kiss my cheek. Her lips felt cool against my skin. "Mark will be back tomorrow to check on you," she said. It didn't feel like a promise. It felt like a warning. The next afternoon, I sat at the little mahogany desk my husband, Frank, had built for me. I was sorting through the mail, the sun warming my hands as it streamed through the window. Tucked between a catalogue and a letter from my church was an envelope from my bank. I opened it with Frank's old silver letter opener. It was a statement. My eyes scanned the lines of numbers until they landed on a charge I didn't recognize. Financial consultation fee, 200. I hadn't consulted with anyone. I picked up the heavy black receiver of my telephone and dialed the bank's main number. The woman who answered was polite, but her voice was guarded. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller," she said after a long pause. "I can't give out details over the phone. It seems the consultation was authorized by a Mr. Mark Miller on your account." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I hung up without another word. The phone rang just 2 minutes later. The caller ID showed Mark's name. His voice was slick with false concern. "Mum, are you bothering the tellers again?" I didn't answer right away. I just listened to the quiet hum on the line, the sound of my own steady breathing. He came over that evening, letting himself in with his own key. He sat on the arm of my favorite armchair, a place Frank would never have dreamed of sitting. He explained the $200 fee was for managing my portfolio, something he was now doing to help me out. He patted my hand, his skin cool and dry against mine. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. he said, smiling. It was a phrase my own father used to say with affection. Coming from Mark, it felt like a dismissal, a pat on the head for a dog. He was making my own money, the money Frank and I had saved for 40 years, a secret he was keeping from me. He left me sitting there, in the quiet of my own home, feeling like a guest. The Wednesday potluck at church was usually the highlight of my week. The hum of friendly chatter, the smell of baked ham, and my friend Carol's famous Jell-O salad. But that day, the paper plate felt heavy in my hand. Carol sat down next to me on one of the folding chairs. The metal legs scraped against the linoleum. "Eleanor, you're a million miles away," she said, her voice soft. "Everything all right?" I opened my mouth to tell her about the television and the pantry and the feeling of being a guest in my own house. But then Brenda, who had insisted on driving me, slid into the chair on my other side. She had a slice of lemon meringue pie that she placed in front of me. "Mum's just been a bit forgetful lately," Brenda said to Carol, her voice full of sweet, fake concern. "It gets her down sometimes." Carol gave me a look of pity, and I just stared at the perfect white peaks of the meringue, feeling my story being written for me. Back home, I decided to check my bank account. I sat down at the old desktop computer my husband, Frank, had bought years ago. The tower hummed quietly under the desk. I clicked on the bank's website and typed in my password. "Invalid password." The screen flashed in red letters. I tried again, slowly, making sure I hit every key just right. "Invalid password." My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. It was a text from Mark. "Hi, Mum. Changed your bank password to make it easier. It's simpler for you." I stared at the screen. Simpler for who? It didn't feel like help. It felt like he had changed the locks on my own front door. I couldn't sleep that night. The numbers and the words kept turning over in my mind. Around 2 in the morning, I got out of bed. The floorboards were cool under my bare feet. I went to my closet and pulled out the old shoebox from the top shelf, the one where I kept all my paper bank statements. It smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I sat on the edge of my bed, a small lamp casting a yellow circle of light around me. I started with the statement from 3 months ago, running my finger down the columns of numbers. Then I saw it. A recurring payment. $300 every month to a company called Prestige Auto Aesthetics. I had never heard of it. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the small screen, and typed the name into Google. The first result popped up, a subscription service for luxury car detailing. The next morning, Brenda stopped by with my prescriptions. I waited until she had put her purse down on the kitchen counter. I held up the bank statement. "Brenda, what is this $300 charge?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Mark had just bought a new Lexus, a shiny black one that gleamed in my driveway. She glanced at the paper and laughed, a light, airy sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mom, that must be from Dad's old accounts. You know how messy the paperwork got after he passed." She waved a dismissive hand. "Don't you worry about it. My Frank had been gone for 5 years. He drove a 10-year-old Ford pickup, and the only detailing it ever got was from the car wash down on Main Street. The lie was so easy for her, so quick. It hung in the air between us, colder than the hum of the refrigerator. That Sunday, they sat me down at the dining room table for what they called a family meeting. Mark and Brenda sat across from me, their faces arranged in serious, caring expressions. Mark cleared his throat. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly in the silence. "Mum, Brenda and I have been talking," he began. "We're worried about you, about the bills, the passwords, all of it. Brenda reached across the polished wood of the table and patted my hand. Her skin was cool. We think it would be best, just to protect your assets, if one of us had power of attorney, to help you manage things so you don't have to worry. They said it with such love, as if they were protecting me from a storm, not from themselves. I told them I needed to think about it. Mark patted my shoulder, a gesture that was supposed to be comforting, but felt like he was checking a piece of furniture for dust. Brenda kissed my cheek. Her perfume was too strong, and it lingered in the air long after the front door clicked shut. The house was suddenly quiet, except for the hum of the old refrigerator. I stood there in the silence for a full minute. I felt the weave of the carpet under my house slippers. I looked at the framed photo of my husband, Frank, on the mantel. He had such a kind smile. He would never have believed this. I didn't cry. I walked over to the little desk in the corner where Frank used to keep his papers. I opened the bottom drawer. It smelled of old paper and cedar wood. Under a stack of his old tax returns, I found what I was looking for. A small white business card with crisp blue lettering. Chen and Associates. I picked up the phone. My hand was perfectly steady. Yes, I said to the receptionist. I'd like to make an appointment with Ms. Chen to update my will. The law office was on the third floor of a new glass building downtown. It didn't feel like the dusty, comfortable office Frank's old lawyer used to have. This one was all cool air and quiet efficiency. Ms. Chen was a young woman, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a black suit that looked like it cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She didn't treat me like a confused old woman. She poured me a glass of water and looked at me directly. "How can I help you, Eleanor?" she asked. Her voice was calm and clear. I started slowly. I didn't want to sound like a hysterical mother. "I have some questions about power of attorney," I said, folding my hands over my purse. "My children are concerned about me." She nodded, her face giving nothing away. "The legal standard for declaring an adult incompetent is very high," she explained. "It requires clear and convincing evidence that a person is unable to manage their own affairs or make rational decisions about their health and finances." She paused. "It's not just about being a little forgetful." A little seed of an idea began to sprout in the back of my mind. I leaned forward in the plush leather chair. "That's exactly what I'm worried about, Ms. Chen," I said, letting my voice tremble just a little. "My memory. Some days are better than others. I worry that if something happens, my children won't have a clear picture of my state of mind." She listened patiently. "You could keep a journal," she suggested. I shook my head. "My handwriting isn't what it used to be, and my daughter is always tidying up. I'd rather have a record somewhere safe. With you." I took a breath. "What if I sent you emails? Just little notes about my day. Silly, forgetful things. So you could see how I am over time." Ms. Chen looked thoughtful. "That's an unusual request, Eleanor." "I know," I said, my voice suddenly firm. I met her sharp gaze. "They want a record of my confusion. I'll give them a record of their crimes." I opened my purse and pulled out the folded bank statement. I laid it on her polished desk and explained my real plan. Ms. Chen picked up the bank statement. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped on the line item for the luxury car detailing. She read the amount, then looked at me. For a moment, she was all lawyer. "Eleanor, this is a dangerous game. If they petition the court, these emails could be used against you exactly as they see them." "I know," I said quietly, "but it's the only game I have left to play." I told her about the television remote, the tea on the high shelf, The new bank password. I didn't cry or raise my voice. I just laid out the facts, one after another, like old, worn-out playing cards. She stared at the paper in her hand, the one showing 300 of my dollars being spent every month to polish my son's expensive car. Her expression hardened. The professional concern in her eyes shifted to a cold, focused light. "Okay, Eleanor," she said, turning to her computer. The clicking of her keyboard was the only sound in the room. "I'm creating a secure, private client file. Send me your notes. I'll keep them safe." That evening, I sat at my computer. The house was quiet. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. It felt like I was about to step off a cliff. Then I thought of Mark's sigh and Brenda's fake smile, and my fingers started to move. I opened a new email to Ms. Chen. The subject line was simple: groceries. I typed out the body of the message, making sure it sounded just right. Confused, but harmless. "Dear Ms. Chen, just a little note for my file. I went to the store today and forgot the milk again. So silly of me. It was 300. The azaleas in the front yard are looking awfully droopy. Must remember to water them." I read it over one last time. The 300 was the car detailing fee. It was the first entry in my secret ledger. I clicked send. The little whoosh sound from the computer felt like the first shot being fired in a war no one else knew had started. I left my email open on the old desktop computer in the den. I made it look like an accident. I just walked away to the kitchen to get a glass of water, leaving the screen glowing. I heard Brenda's sharp little intake of breath from the other room. I knew she'd seen it. I heard her whisper, "Mark, come look at this." I stood by the sink, my back to the doorway, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I let the water run over my hands, feeling the cold seep into my knuckles. Through the doorway, I could see their two heads bent together in the screen's blue light. Brenda pointed at a line in my email to Ms. Chen. Mark nodded, his face a mixture of pity and satisfaction. They thought they'd found their proof, their smoking gun. They saw a quiet old woman knitting in a chair. They forgot that knitting is just a series of tiny, perfect knots. Their greed was making them so wonderfully careless. The next day, while Brenda was at the grocery store buying me more things I didn't need, I started gathering my real evidence. I pulled the old shoebox of bank statements from under my bed. The dust made me sneeze. I took out my mother's old sewing box, the one with the faded velvet top. It smelled of cedar and ancient thread. I lifted the top tray filled with spools and silver thimbles. Beneath the jumble of fabric scraps and old dress patterns, I started tucking away the documents. The statement with the luxury car detailing fee, the original bill of sale for my husband's Ford, a receipt from the roofer from 2 years ago, showing the warranty was good for another 8. Each piece of paper felt heavy, like a stone I was putting in my pocket. It felt strange, like I was a spy in my own home, hiding secrets from the enemy. An enemy who had my smile and my late husband's eyes. I knew I couldn't rely on online statements alone. I needed to go to the bank. I waited for a Tuesday morning, right after they opened, when it would be quiet. I put on my good coat and walked the 6 blocks by myself. The air was crisp and smelled of damp leaves. The bell over the bank door tinkled, the same sound it had made for 40 years. The manager, a young man named Mr. Davis, smiled at me. "Eleanor, good to see you. What can we do for you today?" "I seem to have forgotten my online password again," I said, trying to sound a little frail. "I was hoping you could help me reset it right here." He nodded, his fingers tapping on his keyboard. He looked up, his smile a little tighter now. "Of course, Eleanor, but your son already set up an alert for any password changes on your account. He'll be notified the second we do this. I looked at Mr. Davis, the scent of industrial cleaner sharp in the air. I kept my hands steady on the cool marble of the counter. That's fine, I said, giving him a small, watery smile. He worries so. It's probably for the best. I went through the process, chose a new password I could remember, and walked out the door. The little bell tinkled behind me. I wasn't even home for an hour before my phone rang. The caller ID said it was Mark. "Mum, is everything okay?" His voice was tight, stretched thin with that false concern I was coming to know so well. "I got a fraud alert from the bank. Said someone changed your password." "Oh dear," I said, letting a little flutter into my voice. Was that me? I was just playing around on that computer thing. I get so confused. I heard him let out a long breath on the other end of the line. Relief. "It's okay, Mom. Just don't do that again, okay? Let me handle the computer stuff." He sounded so relieved, far too relieved for a man who was just worried about his mother. With my new password, I logged into my account that night. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I clicked through the recent transactions, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. And there it was, a cash withdrawal from 3 weeks ago. $5,000. The memo line had one entry, typed in by the teller at Mark's request, I was sure. It said, "Roof repair." My roof was only 2 years old. My husband, God rest his soul, had insisted on a 10-year warranty. I pulled the warranty paperwork from my sewing box to be sure. I sat there, the papers spread out on my kitchen table under the warm light. Then I turned to my computer and started a new email to Ms. Chen. Subject: weather. Body: the roof is leaking something awful. 5,000. I do hope it doesn't rain on the new television. I decided to test my daughter, Brenda. I went to the old cedar chest in my bedroom, the one that smelled faintly of my mother's lavender sachets. Inside was her jewelry box, lined with worn-out velvet. I took out a small, heavy brooch, a spray of silver leaves with tiny sapphire buds. That afternoon, when Brenda stopped by, I held it out to her. "I was thinking of selling some of Mother's old things," I said, watching her eyes. "I don't know what they're worth." A flicker of something, not greed, but opportunity, crossed her face. "Oh, Mom, you shouldn't do that alone. People will try to cheat you. Let me get it appraised for you." I placed the cool metal into her palm. "That would be a great help, dear." She slipped it into her purse. As she left, I felt a pang of loss for the brooch, but a cold, clear sense of purpose settled in its place. I knew I would never see its true value again. A few days later, Brenda came over, her face a perfect mask of gentle pity. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly in the quiet house. She sat on the sofa and took my hand in hers. "I have the appraisal, Mom," she said, her voice soft. "I'm afraid it's not great news." She pulled a small receipt from her wallet. "The jeweler said it's mostly plate. It's pretty, but it's only worth about $100. I nodded slowly, looking down at our hands. "Oh, is that all? Well, thank you for checking, dear." After she left, I went to my late husband's old roll-top desk. From a file labelled Insurance, I pulled a crisp, yellowed document from 1985. It was the original appraisal for my mother's jewelry. I ran my finger down the page until I found it. Silver and sapphire brooch, valued at $1,500. A difference of $1,400. I sat down at my computer, the screen glowing in the dim afternoon light. I opened a new email to Ms. Chen. The subject line was birthday ideas. The message was short. Brenda's birthday is coming up, 1400. She loves shiny things. The mail came on Tuesday, the same as always. The clank of the little metal door of the mailbox was a familiar sound. I sorted through the pile on my kitchen table. A circular from the grocery store, a bill for the water, and one thick, cream-coloured envelope. It had no return address, just a law firm's name embossed in the corner. My hands were steady as I slit it open with my butter knife. The paper inside was heavy and official. I read the words, one after the other. Petition. Competency hearing. In the matter of Eleanor Vance. Attached to the back were copies of my emails to Ms. Chen, my note about the leaky roof and the 5,000, my email about forgetting the milk and the 300. They had printed them out as their proof. My heart began to pound, a strong, steady beat against my ribs. It wasn't fear. It was the feeling you get right before the starting gunfires. It was finally time. The air in Ms. Chen's office smelled of leather books and faint, clean polish. We sat across from each other at her big, dark wood desk. My printed emails were spread out on one side, and the corresponding bank statements were lined up neatly on the other. A perfect match for every number. "They've taken the bait, Eleanor," she said, her voice calm and crisp. "They are walking into a courtroom with a signed confession." She leaned forward. "Now, when we are there, you must play the part they have written for you. Be a little frail. Seem a bit confused by all the legal talk. Answer their lawyers' questions simply." I looked down at my hands, folded in my lap. I don't know if I can be that convincing. Ms. Chen gave me a small, sharp smile. "Let them build their own trap, Eleanor," she said. "You just have to stand aside and let the door swing shut." On the morning of the hearing, I chose my clothes carefully. A pale blue dress, the kind with a soft collar. I put on the comfortable beige cardigan Brenda had given me for Christmas. I wanted to look like the woman they described in their petition. In the courthouse hallway, Mark and Brenda rushed over to me. They were dressed in dark, serious suits. They wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "It's going to be okay, Mom," Mark said, patting my arm. "This is for the best," Brenda whispered, squeezing my shoulder. It was the same thing she'd said when she convinced me to give her a key to my house. I followed Ms. Chen's instructions. I looked at the polished floor, let a single, slow tear trace a path down my cheek, and said nothing at all. When the bailiff's voice echoed, calling our names, I felt their hands on my back, guiding me into the courtroom as if I were a fragile thing that might break. Mark took the stand. He sat straight in the wooden chair, looking earnest and sad. The air in the courtroom was still and smelled like old paper and lemon polish. He spoke about my confusion, how I was getting paranoid about money. "She called the bank just last month," he said, his voice full of false sympathy. "She was convinced someone was stealing from her. It was just a portfolio management fee I set up for her own good." He then presented my email about the roof. "And here, Your Honor, she wrote that the roof was leaking. Our family home has a brand new roof. She was hallucinating." He looked down at his hands as if he were in great pain. The judge glanced over at me, his eyes soft with pity, and I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Brenda was next. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief she must have bought for the occasion. She told the judge how I was always losing things, getting agitated over nothing. "Just last week she thought I'd stolen a little pin of my grandmother's," she said, her voice cracking. She was so upset. Then the next day she'd forgotten all about it. Her lawyer handed the judge another printout. It was my email about her upcoming birthday. She sends these erratic notes, Brenda whispered. She mentions my birthday, but the number makes no sense. We're just so worried. The judge nodded slowly, his expression growing more concerned. My daughter was a better actress than I ever knew. Their lawyer, a man with a shiny bald head and a smug smile, stood up. The petitioners rest, Your Honour. He looked at my children, then at me, as if he'd just tucked a stray animal into a safe, warm box. Then Ms. Chen rose. The click of her sensible heels on the floor was the only sound. Your Honour, we don't dispute the content of the emails my client sent. Mark and Brenda exchanged a quick, triumphant look. Their lawyer's smile widened. Ms. Chen paused, letting the silence hang in the air. We just dispute their meaning. I'd like to call an expert witness in accounting. Ms. Chen called herself to the stand. It was an unusual move, but she had filed the proper motions. She was sworn in, not as my lawyer, but as the recipient of the emails. She placed a neat binder on the witness stand and turned to the judge. Your Honour, I am also a certified forensic accountant, she said calmly. And these emails are not a sign of confusion. They are a ledger. She projected a document onto the wall screen. It was a simple spreadsheet. On one side was a list of my emails. On the other, a list of bank transactions. Let's begin with the first email, she said, her voice crisp and clear. On May 5th, Eleanor sent me a message about forgetting milk. She mentioned the number 300. On that same day, her bank statement shows a $300 payment to Prestige Auto Detailing, a service we have confirmed for the Lexus owned by her son, Mark. Ms. Chen walked the judge through every single line. Her voice never wavered. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The email about the leaky roof 5,000, she continued, pointing to a line on the screen. It was sent the day after a $5,000 cash withdrawal was made from Eleanor's account. The signature on the slip belongs to Mark, who had access as a co-signer. She clicked to the next slide. And Brenda's birthday 1400? That was sent the day after my client received an appraisal for a family brooch. An appraisal arranged by her daughter for $100. The original certified appraisal from a decade ago valued it at $1,500. The difference is $1,400. The colour drained from my children's faces. They looked like statues, pale and frozen. The judge was no longer looking at me with pity. He was staring, stone-faced, at them. Ms. Chen closed her binder with a soft click. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. Your Honour, these are not the emails of a confused woman. She turned her head just enough to look at my children, her voice clear and cold as ice water. They are a meticulous log of financial fraud, kept by a mind that is sharper than their greed. The judge leaned forward, his elbows on the bench. He took off his reading glasses and polished them slowly with a small cloth. He wasn't looking at me with pity anymore. He was staring at Mark and Brenda, and his face was a mask of stone. My son's face was the colour of old oatmeal. Brenda was twisting the strap of her purse, her knuckles white. The air conditioning hummed, the only sound in the room. The judge put his glasses back on. Petition for conservatorship is dismissed, with prejudice. His gavel came down with a sharp crack that made me jump. He looked right at Mark and Brenda. I would strongly advise you both to retain separate legal counsel. This court is forwarding all submitted evidence to the district attorney's office. Court was adjourned. People started to shuffle and murmur. Mark took a step toward me, his hand outstretched. Mum, I can explain. I didn't say a word. I just looked at his hand, then at his face. I turned my back on him and took Ms. Chen's arm. We walked out of the courtroom together, the heavy wooden doors swinging shut behind us. I didn't look back. The days that followed were the quietest I had known in years. My phone didn't ring with demands or false concern. No one showed up at my door with groceries I didn't need. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. He was a kind young man who smelled faintly of metal and oil. He changed the locks on my front and back doors. "There you go, ma'am," he said, handing me a set of shiny new keys. "All secure." I locked the door behind him, the deadbolt sliding home with a solid, satisfying thud. The house was empty, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. For the first time, I realized the silence wasn't an absence of noise. It was the sound of my own peace. Ms. Chen's office was cool and smelled of paper and lemon polish. We sat across from her big mahogany desk, a fresh set of documents between us. "Are you sure about this, Eleanor?" she asked gently. "Completely disinheriting them is a final step." "They made their choice," I said, my voice steady. I picked up the heavy pen she offered. "Now I'm making mine." I signed my name on the last page of the new will. Then I signed the papers for the new trust. My hand didn't shake. "So it's done," I said. "They can't touch a penny." "Not a penny," Ms. Chen confirmed. "Everything will go into a trust for your grandchildren's education and medical needs. It will be managed by the bank. Your children will have no access and no say." A week later, a letter arrived. It was a thick, cream-coloured envelope, and I recognized Brenda's flowery handwriting immediately. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it. I could almost hear her voice, full of excuses, accusations, maybe even tears. I pictured her sitting at her kitchen table, crying about how unfair I was being. I walked back into the kitchen and took a black marker from the junk drawer. I didn't open the envelope. I just wrote in big, clear letters across the front. "Return to sender." I walked outside and put it in my mailbox, raising the little red flag. It was a boundary I had never had before, and it felt stronger than any deadbolt. My friend Carol from church came over the next Tuesday. I made her a cup of my favourite orange pekoe tea. I finally put the canister on the counter where I could reach it, right next to the sugar bowl. The afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window, making little dust motes dance in the air. She held her warm mug in both hands. "Eleanor, you seem different. Lighter." I took a deep breath and told her everything. The remote control, the pantry shelves, the bank statements, the emails. I told her about Ms. Chen and the courtroom. The whole sorry story tumbled out of me. She didn't say a word until I was finished. She just listened, her brow furrowed with concern. Then she reached across the little kitchen table and put her hand on mine. Her skin was as soft and wrinkled as my own. "It's about time you put yourself first," she said, her voice firm. We sat there in silence for a moment, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator between us. It felt good to be believed, without having to show a single piece of paper as proof. The next weekend, I started selling things. I began with the enormous mahogany dining set that Mark and Brenda insisted I keep. "It's a family heirloom, Mum," Brenda had said. It was an heirloom that seated 12, and I usually ate my soup watching television. The house echoed as the movers carried it out. The bare space on the rug looked like a promise. I sold the heavy velvet curtains that blocked all the light. I sold the china cabinet filled with dishes I was never allowed to use. Each item that left the house felt like a stone being lifted off my chest. The rooms felt bigger, brighter. I could breathe easier. An estate sale company handled everything. The man in charge, a kind fellow named Arthur, would hand me a check at the end of each day. "You're doing great, Eleanor," he'd say. "Making room for the new?" I wasn't sure what the new was yet, but I knew it wouldn't require polishing silver. One evening, the phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered it anyway. A bad habit. "Mum?" It was Mark's voice, thin and strained. I hadn't heard from him since the day in court. I didn't say anything. I just listened to the sound of his breathing on the other end of the line. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly, counting the seconds of silence. "Mom, I'm in some trouble," he finally said, his voice cracking. "I just need a little help. Alone. Just until I get back on my feet." I thought about the car detailing, the roof repair that never happened, the pretty little head I wasn't supposed to worry. I held the phone tight. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a clear summer morning. "You must have the wrong number." Then I gently placed the receiver back in its cradle and cut the connection. That phone call was the final push I needed. The house was too big. It was full of memories, and not all of them were good. It was time to leave the ghosts behind. I called a realtor the very next day. When the for sale sign went up on the lawn, it caused quite a stir. My HOA president, a nosy woman named Doris, who lived across the street, marched right over. Her face was pinched with disapproval. "Eleanor, you're selling?" she asked, as if I'd committed a crime. "But this is your family home. What about your children?" I was watering the petunias in my front window box. I turned off the hose and looked her straight in the eye. A little smile played on my lips. "My family," I told her, "is who I choose." The look on her face was better than any casserole I'd ever made. The realtor showed me a lovely 2-bedroom condo in a 55-plus community on the other side of town. It had a balcony that overlooked a rose garden and a sparkling blue pool. The air smelled of chlorine and blooming flowers. There was a big sign at the entrance. "No soliciting." I liked that very much. I walked through the bright, airy rooms. The kitchen was small but modern. The hum of the central air was quiet and efficient. It was perfect. I called Carol that afternoon to tell her the news. "It sounds wonderful, Eleanor," she said. There was a pause. "You know," she said, her voice full of mischief, "I saw another unit for sale in that same building, right next door, in fact." A little thrill went through me. The idea of having a friend, a real friend, just a few steps away felt like winning the lottery. Carol and I decided to move in on the same day. It just seemed right. A big yellow truck pulled up in front of my new building, and another one pulled up right behind it for her. The movers were 2 young men, polite and strong. They called me Mom, and handled my mother's old china cabinet like it was made of spun glass. No one sighed. No one checked their phone while I was talking. "Where would you like this, Mom?" one of them asked, holding the box labeled Kitchen Everyday Dishes. "Right there on the counter is fine for now, thank you," I said. It felt so simple. That evening, Carol and I sat on flattened cardboard boxes in the middle of my new living room. The air smelled of fresh paint and warm pizza. We didn't have any plates unpacked, so we ate right off the paper napkins. The sound of our laughter echoed in the empty space. It was the best meal I'd had in years. The condo community had a welcome packet, and inside was a flyer for the social committee. They met every Tuesday morning in the clubhouse. I walked over, my heart thumping just a little. The room smelled of coffee and that faint, flowery scent of air freshener. A woman with bright white hair and a kind smile introduced herself as Judy. "We need a new treasurer for the newsletter," she said, looking around the table. "It's just keeping track of the printing costs and the ad money from the local diner." A few people shifted in their chairs. I took a small breath. "I could do that," I said. I'm good with numbers. Judy beamed at me. Eleanor, that would be wonderful. Welcome aboard. No one asked if I was sure I could handle it. They just handed me the ledger. A week later, a thick envelope arrived in my new mailbox. It was from the real estate company. I carried it inside and sat at my small kitchen table, the morning sun warming the wood. The hum of the new refrigerator was a gentle, steady sound. I slit the envelope open with my letter opener, the one Mark always said was too sharp for me to have. Inside was the check from the sale of my house. The number had a lot of zeros. I laid it flat on the table and just looked at it. It wasn't just money. It was security. It was a roof over my head that no one could threaten to take away. For the first time in a very long time, I felt the solid ground beneath my feet. That afternoon, with a cup of tea beside me, I opened my laptop. I didn't hesitate. I typed Alaskan cruises into the search bar. Pictures of bright blue glaciers and green forests filled the screen. I found a 7-day trip leaving in September with a balcony room. I clicked on it and booked 2 tickets, one for me and one for Carol. Are you sure, Eleanor? She'd asked when I told her my plan. That's a lot of money. It's my money, Carol, I'd said. It's time I spent some of it on something that brings me joy. I pulled out the debit card that had only my name on it and typed in the numbers. The little green check mark appeared on the screen. Confirmation. An email dinged in my inbox a moment later. It felt less like a receipt and more like a permission slip for the rest of my life. A few days later, a thin envelope with a familiar childish scrawl showed up in my mailbox. It was a birthday card, even though my birthday was still 2 months away. The postmark was from a town 30 miles from where Brenda lived. My heart did a funny little skip. It was from my oldest grandchild, Sarah. I opened it carefully. Inside, below the printed greeting, was a short note written in blue pen. I know what they did, Grandma. I'm so sorry. I found your new address from Aunt Carol's daughter. I love you. I had to sit down on the little bench by the mailboxes. I read the words again and again. It wasn't just a note. It was a bridge back to a part of my family I thought I had lost for good. I set up a video call with my grandchild the next day. Her face popped up on my screen, so bright and young. We didn't talk about her mother. We didn't talk about the court case or the money. I asked her about her classes, about a boy she liked, about her dream of being a veterinarian. Grandma, is it true about the money for school? She asked, her voice small. It is, I said, my own voice steady. It's all safe. It's waiting for you, whenever you're ready for it. That is a promise. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she was smiling. It was the first time in a long time I'd seen a real smile in my family. I knew then that some things could still be saved. Carol and I went on that cruise. The air in Alaska was so cold and clean, it felt like it scrubbed my lungs out. We stood on the deck wrapped in thick blankets, the ship's engine a low hum beneath our feet. I saw a whale breach the water, a magnificent, impossible thing. It was bigger than my old house. Can you believe it, Eleanor? Carol whispered, her breath making a little cloud in the air. No, I said, and I truly couldn't. The world felt so much bigger than my living room, so much grander than my worries. I didn't think about bank statements or courtrooms. I just watched the icebergs drift by, looking like fallen pieces of the sky. I came home to my condo. It was quiet and smelled faintly of the lemon polish I used. I checked the answering machine next to the phone. The little red light wasn't blinking. There were no frantic messages, no angry demands, no tearful apologies. There was just silence. I had my number changed a month after the hearing. The phone company charged me $20 for it. I smiled as I wrote the check. It was the best $20 I had ever spent. The silence was the sound of my own peace, and it was priceless. The local library needed volunteers to help seniors with technology. I signed up right away. My first student was a gentleman named George, a retired history professor with a brand new tablet. He was trying to email his son. He kept hitting the wrong button. "I'm so sorry," he said, his face flushed. "I feel like a fool." "Don't you dare," I told him gently. "The red button is for off. They make them confusing on purpose." I showed him the right icon, my finger tapping the screen lightly. He got it on the second try. He looked up at me, his eyes crinkling in a genuine smile. It felt good to be useful, not just convenient. Ms. Chen called me on a Tuesday morning. The sun was streaming through my window, lighting up dust motes dancing in the air. Her voice was calm and professional, as always. "It's over, Eleanor," she said. "Mark and Brenda accepted a plea deal. No jail time, but they have to pay full restitution." "Oh," I said, sitting down in my favorite armchair. "Where does the money go?" "Directly into the grandchildren's trust," she said. There was a pause. "They are being forced to fund the very future they tried to steal." I thanked her and hung up the phone. A final, quiet irony. They were paying for their own children's education after all. I was at the condo pool, reading a book my new club had chosen. The sun felt warm on my arms, and the air smelled of chlorine and sunscreen. It was peaceful. Then I heard a familiar, sharp voice. "Eleanor, I can't believe it's you." I looked up over my glasses. It was Doris, the former HOA president from my old neighborhood. She was visiting a friend and looked just as nosy as ever. She hurried over to my lounge chair, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I heard what your children did," she said, her eyes wide with second-hand drama. "It's just awful, simply awful." I closed my book, marking my page with my finger. I gave her a small, calm smile. "The weather is lovely today, isn't it?" Doris blinked, thrown off. "Well, yes, but I'm so glad I moved here in time for summer," I said, looking out at the sparkling water. I didn't give her an inch of my story. It wasn't hers to have. The next week, I hosted a small dinner party. Just Carol, George from the library, and 2 other women from my water aerobics class. The smell of my baked ziti filled my little kitchen. It was a recipe I hadn't made in years. George was telling a funny story about his first attempt at online dating. She said she loved the outdoors, so I suggested a walk in the park. Turns out, outdoors meant the patio at Starbucks. We all laughed. The sound was easy and genuine. We talked about a new movie, about Carol's plans for her garden, about the best place to buy fresh bread. The conversation floated around the table like a butterfly. No one talked about their ungrateful children or their worries about money. My home was filled with a warmth I had chosen. A few nights later, I sat on my new patio with my journal. The air was cool, and the crickets had started their evening song. For months, my notes had been a secret ledger of betrayal, full of numbers and codes. Now the pages were different. I wrote down a list of plants for the community garden I was starting. Tomatoes, zucchini, and lots of herbs. I sketched a little diagram of where the raised beds should go. My pen moved across the paper, not to record a crime, but to create a plan. I wasn't a spy in my own home anymore. I was just a woman with a notebook, dreaming about dirt and sunlight. The mail came the next day. Among the flyers was a long official envelope from the trust company. I opened it at my kitchen table. It was the final statement, showing the full restitution payment from Mark and Brenda. The money was now safely in the trust for my grandchildren. I looked at the number. It was just a number. It didn't make me feel angry or sad or even victorious. It was simply the end of a transaction. I folded the paper neatly, slipped it into my file box, and closed the lid. Outside my window, my potted azaleas looked a little thirsty. I filled my watering can at the sink and went back outside. The plants needed me more than that piece of paper did. I was on my balcony with a hot cup of my favourite Earl Grey tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and soft purple. The warmth of the mug seeped into my hands. I wasn't listening for a key in the lock. I wasn't waiting for a phone call that would be full of sighs and demands. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and a bird singing its last song of the day. I took a sip of tea and leaned back in my chair. I was simply here, in this moment, in a life I had carefully, quietly, and finally built for myself. I was at peace.